might be a bit emotional this morning if you're in number 10, because there's this mega poll which is out. Well, it predicts a Tory wipeout on the horizon. The Conservatives reduced to just 72 seats. But if you tie the potential of at least some tactical voting in with that, then the Tories could end up with just 66.
It's such a devastating result, this poll, that you think, surely it has to be right. I know there are lots of people who say it still could go the Conservatives' way, but this is beginning to look very bleak. Labour is also predicted to win by a huge landslide with a possible 302-seat majority.
I mean, that's unbelievable. Well, the polling suggests the Conservatives would only return around 7 more MPs than the Lib Dems.
It's extraordinary. So let's get on with the campaign now. And Sir Keir Starmer was in Scotland sharing Labour's plans to create a publicly owned energy company called Great British Energy. Now, the promise being that it would bring a huge number of jobs to the area. Meanwhile, Rishi Sunak visited the northwest of England, continuing his campaign trail. He hit out, of course, at Labour's handling of Diane Abbott, suggesting that Angela Rayner is really the one in charge of the party. The Lib Dems and Ed Davey pledged to extend free school meals to all primary school children, starting with those who are living in poverty. Still got that cough. He challenged Labour to match their policy, and the SNP were in Glasgow calling on the government to commit to an emergency budget immediately following the election. John Swinney, meanwhile, admitting his party faces an uphill struggle. So shall we listen to what the leaders had to say on day 9 of that campaign trail?
We are announcing bold policies because that's what the situation demands. I want to deliver a more secure future for everyone in our country. That requires a clear plan and bold action.
But we're also talking about our economic ideas to grow our economy and also deal with the cost of living. And we're talking about the environment. That's so important. People are really angry that the Conservatives have allowed the water companies to pump their filthy sewage into rivers, lakes, onto beaches.
Renewables are cheaper. There's a massive prize here. Lower bills. Security, the next generation of jobs. So clean power is the best opportunity we've had in a generation.
But I do put out a cautionary word that a lot of what I hear of Labour's energy plans will result in significant loss of employment in the northeast of Scotland in the oil and gas sector, and I don't want to be part of that.
Labour, and a vote for Labour, is a chance to end that chaos, to turn a page, to change for the better of the country.
These uncertain times demand that our country has someone who's prepared to take bold action, has a clear plan underpinned by conviction and vision, and that's what the country will get with me.
Well, that's what the leaders were saying yesterday. I mean, on that poll, which would give the Conservatives something like 66 to 72 seats, which is, frankly, a wipeout. There are some pretty big names who would lose their seats under that, including Oliver Dowden, the Deputy PM, the Home Secretary, James Cleverly, Defence Secretary, Grant Shapps, Penny Mordaunt, Kemi Badenoch, Claire Coutinho, Mel Stride, Education Secretary, Gillian Keegan, Mark Harper, David Davis, Victoria Prentice, Esther McVeigh, Andrew Mitchell, Johnny Mercer. They'd all go to Labour. Alex Chalk and Michael Tomlinson would lose to the Lib Dems. Alistair Jack would lose to the SNP. Simon Hart to Plaid Cymru.
And another big name would be Sir Jacob Rees-Mogg. Well, joining us now is political commentator Peter Spencer. This is one heck of a poll for anyone in number 10 to wake up to. It is so stunning that you can't help but think it can't go any other way. The Tories are facing wipeout, aren't they?
I think it's pretty fair to say that a Labour government on July the 5th is a racing certainty. However, it is worth noting that the polls do give very different pictures. And one reason for that is the way they divvy out the don't knows. And it would appear that 1 in 8 of us has yet to make up our minds, and that includes 1/5 of those who backed Boris last time round are now undecided. That is a very large swathe of voters, which is how come the Conservatives haven't just thrown in the towel and just gone home, frankly. So they still are hoping that at very least they will form something approaching a viable opposition, although quite how they will react when the dust settles, whether there will be those on the right of the party who say, look, we've got it all wrong, we've got to completely rebrand ourselves, whether indeed there's a possibility that there could be a split, something on the lines of the SDP all those years back. We await developments. But Rishi Sunak clearly is still pretty chipper and still reckons he's got something at least to play for.
Is it? I mean, at what point, Peter, do the Tories start campaigning on the basis of mitigating losses and saying, you know, this Labour government is going to need a strong opposition to hold it to account? I mean, is that anything they would ever contemplate?
I dare say they're contemplating it, but I can't imagine realistically they're going to admit to it, because that is a sort of another way of throwing in the towel. But I'm sure those calculations are going on. And it is worth noting, actually, Labour's strategy when it comes to the polling day itself. They're not even going to bother about knocking on doors of people who've made it pretty plain they're going to back them. They're going for the don't knows, they're going for the undecideds, because it is quite interesting to note for all these polls, Sir Keir Starmer is still intensely nervous about the way this is going to play. And it's worth remembering that back in 1997, even on the very eve of Tony Blair's landslide victory, he was still still in dialogue with Paddy Ashdown, the Liberal Democrat leader, with a thought of maybe forming a coalition between the two parties. Of course, in the event, he had to say, listen, I'm sorry, Paddy, old chap, but we seem to have a bit of a majority here. But nonetheless, Keir Starmer is playing very safe, if for no other reason, because although it would appear that the electorate has comprehensively said up yours to the Conservative Party, they have yet to fall in love with him, Keir Starmer.
Is there anything that you can think of that the Tories could do now to win over the don't knows, the people who really haven't yet made up their minds? Is there anything you can think of they could do?
Well, it's quite interesting. We know that there's going to be a TV debate in the early part of next week, and which, although ostensibly the two party leaders will be talking to one another, in fact, what they will be doing is showcasing their personality and their sincerity to the electorate. And I imagine that Keir Starmer is living in hope. Sorry, not Keir Starmer. Rishi Sunak is living in hopes that somehow he'll get it across to the voters that actually he's a jolly decent chap and he really is on everyone's side.
There's a real danger for the Labour Party here, isn't there, Peter? I mean, if this all went as predicted. But they're not. They would win without the passion behind them, if you like. It's people fed up with the incumbents rather than having any great passion for Labour. Well, that leaves them very open, doesn't it, after a first term, to people saying, well, you know, you've not achieved anything a great deal. We didn't really support you that much in the first place. You just weren't the Conservatives. So they've got to play it very carefully if they want to be in this for the long term.
Absolutely right, and the long term is the only way in which anything very much will be achieved. I mean, in the Labour Party campaign, absolutely central is the economy because, of course, of the cost of living crisis. And they are pointing to the widespread support for the Labour Party among big business, because of the fact that their pitch essentially is the only way to generate wealth for this country is for investment by companies in the British economy. And their pitch, the second line on that pitch, is the fact that there's been so much churn within the Conservative Party and so much instability that long-term investment is not happening because business, frankly, does not trust the British government. Starmer's pitch will be that actually from now on you can trust the British government, and it's worth noting that this very day, when Starmer is out there on his battle bus, he will be accompanied by Angela Rayner, colourful character as she is, and indeed Rachel Reeves, the Shadow Chancellor, who of course is a former Bank of England economist.
OK, Peter, thanks very much indeed.
Talk about churn. If they lose all of those major... If the Tories lose and lose all those major names, it'll be an opposition we hardly recognise.
Well, it would be a new... Yeah, but it would be a new party. Yeah. In effect, yes. With lots of new faces coming forward.
Well, maybe it's good. It's good that it allows you new talent to come forward.
Heck, I mean, possibly. But you can understand, it makes it a bit clearer to understand why so many people have said, I'm not standing at the next election now. Even people making very late calls on that, because perhaps they just don't want to face it if there is that much of a racing certainty, as Peter put it. Of course, what you would expect when it actually comes to polling day is for those lines to narrow.
Yes, they will.
For the gap to narrow.
But the gap is so huge. That's what I mean. It surely can't be wrong, can it? As a prediction, can it be wrong?